There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it is hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. That's by William Stafford, and a piece Melissa really enjoys, and a piece that Melissa really felt summed up our beautiful conversation as well. I feel really excited to welcome you into this conversation that Melissa and I shared. Melissa has been a guide on my own journey through the body and dance and movement, and my coming out and my coming home. And so in this conversation, we really explore how embodiment and movement supports us embodying more of ourselves as leaders and stewards of the emerging future. And we explore how the cohering of our minds and bodies and movement supports us in processing trauma stored in the nervous system. How dance is a practice of life, and how by building capacity and going deeper in, we have greater capacity to go out and be in the world without losing our tether, or without being connected to that place of centeredness, of wisdom, of insight, and therefore having access to a kind of right action through being tethered and grounded. We also explore the importance of community in these practices as instruments of attunement, of attuning to each other, of co-regulating, and how movement and dance and accessing our shared nervous system, in a sense, supports us in that. And what that means for us as leaders and stewards in building our own capacity to cohere, to co-regulate, and to build community. And so this is a really juicy one. We dive into some quite real and raw topics as well, and you really get a sense of, there's also the way that Melissa has guided me and guides many thousands around the world through movement and through coming home to ourselves together. So enjoy, and I hope that you get as much joy from Melissa and I's dance in this conversation as we did. Grab a tea, take a breath, notice the inhale, the exhale, and the space between. A moment in between moments. Here you are. You're listening to Spaces Between with your friend and host, Elle Jeffrey. An open exploration into restoring connection in the 21st century in our personal lives, our relations, and our communities. What does it mean to live in relationship to the wholeness of who we are together? I'm not one for ads, and am one for creating something beautiful with others, in this case, you. So if you enjoy our time together, I do invite you to subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, rate and leave a review for the show. And if you're feeling super generous and fueled and filled up by our conversations, you might even consider donating or soon joining my Patreon membership. Just visit www.spacesbetweenpodcast.com, where you'll also find show notes and other useful links and resources following these conversations. So this is it. Let's dive in. Brilliant. All right, Melissa, thank you so much for taking time for a conversation in this incredibly wacky and fertile time that we're in.
It's such a pleasure and honor to be here with you. I'm so grateful that you reached out, and I'm looking forward to dialing in and diving in and seeing what wants to be discovered together.
Yeah. And as I mentioned before, and I just feel to mention, I suppose, to open our conversation, which inevitably will be around restoring wholeness, just how vivid and potent and continually revealing my memories are of our time together when I was living in Boulder, going to movement mass every Sunday, and my own journey of coming out and coming into my sexuality and coming home and coming into my love of sensuality. And for that to be totally okay and actually almost necessary as someone who identifies as a man. And so just, I suppose, sharing immense gratitude for the guidance and holding in the work that you steward in the world and my own journey of coming home to myself, my own wholeness. So look forward to diving into those themes.
I don't know that I did anything except create a space where permission was the norm, and your own beautiful soul just knew exactly what to do once it was in fertile ground, as you say.
Mhm.
And it's exquisite to see you not only home, but just like growing such an abundance of intelligence and love and forward thinking and initiation coming through you. So well done, my friend. Really beautiful.
Mm. Thank you. So to begin, I'm wondering if, you would be open to painting us a picture of just firstly, where you are now, and take that whichever register you'd like.
Well, I'm on planet Earth. I'm on the Earth, deeply on this Earth, in a time of utter unrest and potential, and incredible suffering, and essential soul emergence, both individually and collectively. My physical body's located in the lands of the Seminole people here. Those are the original people of this land where I sit taking care of my 96-year-old father who just survived COVID here in South Florida, also known as. And my home is my body. I'm located deeply in my body and very, very intimately woven with my heart and the heart of so many, the heart of the world in a certain way. I have gone so deep inside the sacred ground of my own being, navigating through so much trauma and so much transformation, that this instrument is an ever more refining tool of connection and discernment to the pulse, to the pain, to the pleasure of the world. And so that's where I'm located, is it, between that world and this world, and as a receptacle for energy that longs to move through to help, as you say, rewhole or heal or awaken myself and all sentient beings.
Aho.
Yeah.
Mm.
In our country now, we don't even say aho anymore. It's just really, we've been reconstructing our thinking and deconstructing that. And I have been blessed and given permission by Native elders to speak that. And I'm just going to speak it here. But I have chosen to stop utilizing the language of people who are not my original people as a way of just really remembering who my original people were. And they would say, amen and shalom and hallelujah and many other things. And I feel so connected to the Native American peoples of our land and deep, dear soul friends. And I have given permission, but I personally have stopped using that way of blessing and saying it is so. And there's no judgment, but at all about you sharing it. But we're in such a revolution right now of consciousness. And we have the opportunity to just ask, is that really the right language for us in this moment? So I bring that up out of utter and complete respect to the traditional peoples of this land, and to you, my friend, who I know comes from a noble, noble place of honor the sacred.
Yeah. And so, I suppose I'm curious, as a way of, which is why I love these conversations, just the real and raw dance that we're in already. Off we go. And so for you, I suppose I'm sensing this for me, to connect with one's personal lineage and line of language. And so I'm just sensing for me where that lands, and I suppose that's my own inquiry.
Yes. And you have such a beautiful lineage to draw from, and there's just that little refined congruence when it's somehow connected to what our soul chose, how it chose to incarnate in this lifetime. And you and I are both beings who, we gravitate towards the presence of the divine, whether it's in the temple, the mosque, the church, the street corner, the grassy field, the ocean, whatever it is. If it's alive and vibrating with love, we're there. We resonate. We understand. We want to apprentice. We want to be part of. And there's something about the really refined cultural streams that are our ancestry that I think it's important, as you know, and I know you're doing this work, of us just to keep opening to the medicine of our own people in this body at this time, because the lived experience for me is really different than it is for others. And so, I'm way into our unity, but I'm also really into discerning how different my lived experience is than so many people who show up in different bodies with different abilities, bodies that have different gender identities, bodies that are different races and different cultures and circumstances that bring them into different socioeconomic spaces. And so, anyway, that was a big, long answer to yes. I look forward to hearing how that works for you. And it's a life path, just like embodiment is. It's like a constant unfolding of the true nature of our own soul in this lifetime, to be understanding more about where we come from and what we're to do with that going forward.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that in. Yeah, and just one, I suppose, note for me before we move on to something else. But for me, the question, I suppose the question's been muddled, being of part Indian descent, and my dad is Australian, but more specifically Scottish and Irish descent. Whenever I share about my heritage, I'm much more excited to share about my Indian heritage as I am to my Scottish and Irish descent. There's a lot of shame still around my whiteness here in Australia and with this country. And so, there's almost this sense that something needs to be done, something more needs to be done before I can start to reclaim my whiteness and really honor that line within me. And so I suppose for me, it's a question is what, in the beginning, there was a sense that something more needs to be done as a collective. But now for me, as an alive question is, what am I being called to do within and with myself in order to feel that I've repaired my relationship with Indigenous peoples and First Nations peoples in this country, first and foremost, and then at the same time, also be really reveling and relishing and learning, remembering around my own whiteness and heritage through my dad's line as well.
Thank you for being so just real about the work, because it is the work of right now. And for us to understand, no matter what our location is out it to understand how these systems of oppressions, these ideologies, these institutions, these interpersonal dynamics that we've internalized have really shaped us, and how we can unwind those false beliefs and those painful feelings and that disassociative somatic experience of being who we are, and you spoke of shame, how if we can unpack that, we can then become a corridor for others who have identities that are kindred to ours to do that same good work. And from that place of inner respect for what your ancestors had to navigate, and understanding, ruthless, courageous looking at what that story has been, will ultimately lead to a place of a lot of compassion, which is so empowering to that part of you that wants to move into right action. And, we get out there and we want to fix and change the world. And sometimes we are separate from how really our own resolved inner material is fueling that. And then we also don't want to get stuck in that inner landscape. That's that sacred activism that you and I started to talk about. What then calls us into right action? Because the simplest gesture made from that wholeness that you speak about and that peace can have ripples that we can't even imagine. And, we just have to really make good friends with this incarnation. And that is part of our privilege, that we have enough safety in our lives, you and I both, to be able to do that inner work. That is our birthright, but there are so many people. The global majority does not have that kind of privilege to actually really unpack these layers that we speak about in our mind, in our hearts, in our bodies, in our ancestry, so that we can move forward with that kind of freedom and efficacy. And so we have privilege, and with that, of course, where I'm going is responsibility. And there's no way your soul is going to go to sleep on this. And there is an urgency, and it can't be rushed. That's the riddle.
Yeah, I love that. The curious kind of paradox of our time, the felt sense and collective sense of urgency, and also the absolute seriousness also that the work that actually needs to be done requires so much tenderness and patience and listening and receptivity and sensing and feeling. And so, we're in a state of emergency. That means we must slow down. Rather the opposite to what we're used to, a kind of hasteful rushing.
Well, I appreciate that message a lot, having been like totally sympathetically wired in my nervous system from so much trauma as a child. I actually think we need to be able to play the whole instrument. And there are times to just slow down. You know, I'm living in a place where these gorgeous birds with these super long neck they come alone. They just go like all day to walk, from here to there. And I just like, whoa, that's deep. And when that call came that my dad had COVID, I had to move like the speed of light. And then with that hurricane coming in on top of it, we had to get everything put together. And there's a way to move so quickly that the stillness is still right there with us. And yet there's no pause in there. There is full presence. And I think that's the purpose of all this years of practice. Going to the dance, in my case, there are many ways to practice. So that when that call comes, we can move at whatever speed and maintain that sense of equanimity. For the most part, there were a few days I wasn't exactly that, but I actually know how to do that too. That's part of it. It's like, okay, I'm infuriated by a dynamic that was happening in the space around me. And I had to work with that. I had to move with that. I had to run with that. I had to dance with that. I had to make loud, and then come back and like, hey, what do we need to make for this person for dinner? And is the generator here? And all that kind of reintegrating when things get hot and fiery. So yes, the soul moves at a very deep and organic pace. And things can move really fast and be soulful and safe and really integrated. So that's part of being a dancer, is being able to go at different times. Keep your feet on the ground in the beat. And when they're not on the ground, know how to freaking resource enough, lean into others, ride the wind, become like fire. Say a prayer so that we can get through it when we are so destabilized, which is kind of where we all are right now. Not necessarily you or me, but the big we.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I love the holding of that, having the dexterity to slow down and to move quick and fast, but with our pole still being tethered in a sense, like to not lose ourselves in the tempo. In a sense, well, yes, to lose ourselves and find ourselves at the same time, but to be tethered amidst the storm, which is, that's why, wow, I miss dancing in groups. But I'm curious to hear just a little for context, and I don't know that I've ever actually heard some of your personal story to this work. And so I'm curious about, any significant rites or transitions that you've been through. And of course, there's many, 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 but that feel significant in this question of, coming to the body as your instrument and medium for cohering, for holding.
Yeah. Well, I came to the body because if I didn't, I don't know that I would have stuck around on the planet, to be really honest. I was like a drug dealing, enraged, obese teenager. I was, rudderless, and I was moving fast. And I was looking for connection anywhere I could find it, and sometimes in really dangerous places. And, I sort of did all my exploration of how to get out and how to open to something bigger through drugs. By the time I was 18, I was done. However, I'd gone pretty deep in. And at that point, I had just, I started to get a glimmer of something much bigger in the universe. And I left home, hitchhiked out of my parents' home, and had many experiences, extreme highs, extreme lows, and began to find my heart, began to understand that emotions are a part of the human experience. I didn't know what anger was. I didn't know what fear was. I didn't have support to connect with those feelings, and I really had so profoundly stuffed them. And really now I realized that I was really messaged. The messaging was, you're too much. So what's wrong with you? Rather than the circumstance or the situation is having problems. So be quiet. So of course I couldn't really stop the feeling. So I shoved them down for a while. And, I started in my late teens, early 20s, just to start asking some deep questions. I started off in engineering school and ended up in architecture and got into sacred space. Oh, what about how could an environment be healing for somebody? And so the whole concept of healing. But mostly I had this sense of something so much bigger. And it was because I was so disassociated in a certain way. It's so funny, the wind just massively picked up on it. But I had this longing to connect with something bigger. It was like something in me, because of all the trauma, just what had that orientation towards the sublime, towards SOS from the spirit. And I started to find teachers and teachings and breadcrumbs and people who saw this beautiful young girl with who hated herself, really. And they saw the light in her, and they took my hand, and I got airlifted, as I say, by fate to India, to South India, to Oroville, and really had my first big, like, whoa, okay, in the embrace of the mother in Oroville. And I went there to do architecture work, and I ended up walking out of the architecture studio saying, who am I to design spaces for these people? I don't even know who they are. So I, of course, zoomed right into the village world and ended up teaching Tamil children and couldn't speak their language. So I had to start moving my body. And, I'm doing all these, as I say, I started acting out in a really positive way. And I had this epiphany in this village of Kotakarai that the children of the world were calling. And movement was the universal language. And I really had no idea what that meant. And I was like speechless for quite many days. And I finished my apprenticeship there. And it touched my soul in a way my soul had never been touched in my life. I was so, I had so deeply come home to myself and in the eyes of these children that were so grateful to be in connection, and that pure love that we exchanged was like home. So I came back to the United States, got pregnant with my first child, of course named her Mariah Lakshmi, and I began a journey, and that really was the beginning of a healing. And I had a near-death experience at her birth because I was so out of my body and nearly hemorrhaged to death. I was having this baby in a garage in Santa Cruz, California. And when I'm just hemorrhaging and hemorrhaging and hemorrhaging, her father at the time, he's still her father, said to me, Melissa, use your will to stop yourself from bleeding. And I was just like, whatever, what are you talking about? Meanwhile, the fire department and the ambulance and everybody's there. And I just cried out, Mother, like from the root of my belly, a place I had no real connection, even though I just delivered a baby. And my hemorrhage, my uterus clamped shut, and I stopped hemorrhaging. And I had this experience of watching my body from another space. And so it was just the beginning of my soul being called into relationship with coming and going from the body and consciously. And of course, I had no idea what had happened to me. But because of a history of sexual violence, I knew how to open. And birth requires that. But I knew nothing about integrating back in. So I was wide open and hemorrhaging and really had bleeding out. Freaked my midwives out. They wrote, it was like written up in midwifery books. So I came out of that and I said, what happened? And that began my journey of like, okay, so there's this body thing and I've got this child and I do not want to give to her what I have been. I need to do something different than what was done with me. And then fast forward, a lot of things happen, a lot. But fast forward 6 years later or 4 years later, maybe 4 years later, I was sitting on a street corner in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I grew up, coming out of an Al-Anon meeting, because part of it was realizing I had grown up in an alcoholic home system community. And there was this picture of this cool woman with like headsets. She was so cool. I was like, wow, I like that. And I was about to go off and be a Waldorf teacher. And I was like, I want some of that. And of course, that was Gabrielle Roth. And I signed up for her workshop. She was coming the next day. My babysitter didn't show up, blah, blah, blah. I ended up getting in that room and I injured myself pretty significantly. So I had to like crawl up to this teacher and say, what do I do? And she's like, come out for lunch with us. And so I'm sitting behind her in the car and she's like, oh, Pittsburgh needs a shaman. And I didn't even really like know what a shaman meant. I was like, oh. And she said, I'm starting a teacher training this year. And I said, well, how do you know if you're ready to apply? She said, why don't you apply and see? Boom, fast forward. I was in California with all these like groovy and body people. I was this 26-year-old, exactly your age, this emaciated girl all dressed in black with this baby, and off we went. And it's just been such an epic journey really since the dance. And I will say this, there are a couple things I'll just say more. The dance was so critical for me in just taking that sympathetically aroused, imbalanced system and meeting it exactly where it was and moving faster and faster and allowing that trauma to sequence through movement. But it also needed stillness. It also needed touch. It also, I needed personal, intimate, not sexually intimate, but interpersonally intimate connection so that I could also awaken my parasympathetic nervous system and settle. And that took a lot of years to get there. But I happened to have been blessed to have been in Boulder raising my child right when Peter Levine was developing his work. And so I was like on the table of all these people figuring out about somatic experiencing. And so I learned very deeply how to track my nervous system while dancing. And that really, the marriage of those two, that's that yin and that yang, that movement and that stillness was so critical for my own soul retrieval and the work that has come through me. And 8 years later, I gave birth to my second child, and it was completely, I walked to the hospital and made love before and walked to the hospital, gave birth to her, and it was erotic and it was ecstatic and it was embodied and it was groovy, and I was home for dinner that night. So it was, so for some reason I'm telling you that story. There were many major thresholds throughout my life. That's kind of been my hallmark, is how do we stay, as you use the word, tethered to the ground, to center, to that which is longing to be awakened, to that which wants to emerge through the cracks, through the narrow passageways of our lives. And, in my case, it's been going through a very serious cancer journey, burying a partner who drowned in the ocean with my daughters and I, and, just divorce and kids and adolescents, hundreds of them, my own included, just a lot of thresholds experience, which prepares us for this time. And, how do we ride the waves when they come and go with them, but also keep coming back and orienting towards ground, towards kindness, towards something bigger that's creating us and holding us and kicking our butts through it.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. I feel like just taking a moment. Yeah. Yeah, it's hearing your story, and I suppose just reflecting on also my experiences in, say, 5 rhythms or open floor or any somatic experiencing body-based practices in community, which is what I'm, I suppose, curious to get into a little more as well, the elements to a movement practice that really create that scaffolding, that fertile ground for the soul to speak, for the soul to reveal itself, for what the kind of pregnant silence that is there in you mentioned the cracks in our lives, that's just wishing to be bared in our bodies and wants to be birthed into the world and through us, creating those spaces. Yeah, I'm curious to hear about the elements that you feel are so crucial in those spaces, being community, being movement, being silence, etc. That the notion of the body and movement and dance being a practice to exist in, I don't want to say in between the worlds, but to allow the cohering of worlds, the spirit and the worlds above and all around, and the depths of the soul and the worlds within. And of course, that's just one orientation, a way of looking at it. But to, as a way of allowing those worlds to meet and to dance together, I just love just as we speak, I'm feeling like I'm on the dance floor dancing it, which is incredible. And it's such a, ecstatic experience of being brought out of being brought out of my, I suppose, smaller self, my story mind. And for me, a mantra is always, if I feel like I'm thinking dance harder, dance faster. And it is an absolute transportation. It feels like all at once and being taken out of myself and being brought back into myself further and further all at the same time, the kind of merging of worlds. And so, thank you for sharing your story. It's just really reflecting also the power and the almost necessity of existing below the head to move through maybe locked energy and freeze states, to move the energy again. And so I'm curious for you, the piece around being witnessed in process and the importance of this being a community, a practice that is practiced in community. I'm curious, how you see the importance of that, and are there moments where there is solo contemplation, and how you, in the way that you design and facilitate and hold space for the stewardship of soul in the world, essentially, what role do you feel community plays in practice?
Well, we've just had an experience of it, haven't we? Where, we're just actually both moving into a deeper space and a more expansive space just by being together in the conversation. And the field that is Melissa is inspiring the field that is Al, and vice versa. The field that is you is speaking over here to me, and something's happening that's wouldn't happen if I were sitting here alone tonight. So that's really, we quicken each other. We require the other to awaken with us and through us and because of us. And so there's this symbiotic exchange of energy that just is. And there's all sorts of research about it now too, this co-regulating that can happen. But that's not where I was going to start. But I did have to celebrate that, like, we're having an experience of it right here when you said, I feel like I'm on the dance floor. And I really want to acknowledge your relationship with Logos, with Word, that you really, ever since I met you, now it's totally embodied. It's beautiful. You are, and just the way you can open to how words can pour through you. It's really gorgeous to feel your mind and your Logos integrated with the rest of you and from all directions. Okay, back to your question. One thing is, I just want to say, somatic experience is a body of work developed by Peter Levine, and it's tricky because we're talking about somatic experiences, and there's this beautiful body of work. He wrote a book called In Your Own Voice that's really worth reading. It's really about how to unwind trauma in the body, and the dance is a brilliant integral part of that, in particular around the rhythm of chaos. So community. Well, it is said the new Buddha is community. We got that. And the new threshold is the spaces between us. And to be very honest with you, I spend a lot of hours every day, every week, in pretty complicated, deep conversations with my colleagues who I'm building an initiative with, working our stuff all the time, and working with power differential, working with language, working with people's vulnerabilities, people's superpowers, people's power over, power with, all this stuff. And to me, that couldn't happen alone, and a lot can happen alone, but not that. And the African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I have to remind myself sometimes, like, dude, you are on a path to go far. And because sometimes I just want to run out the door and do it on my own. With that said, I am a really big advocate for people finding the dance alone and getting serious about practicing the dance solo. I feel like to be a teacher of any of these lineages, 10,000 hours alone on the dance floor in your living room, through your pain, through your pleasure, through your birthing of your children, falling in love, falling out of love, cleaning up the dishes when you're tired, getting up in the morning, celebrating the rising of the sun, all of it, the dance. We have to own it for ourselves. I really feel strongly about that. And I know that that's hard for people. And that doesn't bother me. It's like, okay, dance, it's hard for me. Start with, it's hard for me, and go into that and claim it and make the dance yours, whether somebody's in the room or not. So I really stand with that and for that and as that. With that said, in community, there's so much that can happen. Certainly where two or more are gathered. And if the intention is to bring in something bigger than ourselves, the collective prayer is potent, and the field that gets created is supercharged. And if it's done well, it can just catapult and catalyze a more conscious and expansive dance experience for all. So that's one. And then if you start to bring in different cultures, then all of a sudden we're being blessed with not only the ancestry, but the dignity and the richness of different soul streams that understand the divine and speak her languages, the many languages. And that opens up different parts of our bodies, different parts of our spirits, because I may have incarnated in this form, but I can go through any of those doors and be remembered to myself. There's a part of me that knows something about what the Buddhist and the Hindu and the Christian and the Sikh are in me. I feel like this path is about being able to shapeshift into 10,000 facets of ourselves. So, I am the privileged white woman, and I can find that place in my soul that resonates deeply with someone who is hurting in a way that nothing in my imagination my imagination can go there. My lived experience hasn't. And I say that with a lot of humility, because the truth is I can never know what another person's lived experience is. But I sure can open the channels by being on the dance floor together. And by opening through the dance, my imaginative capacities expand so fully. So we're catalysts for each other. We teach each other about other realities. We're catalysts for each other when someone's in contraction around their fear and somebody is out there just doing their fear dance and, moving with their fear into their excitement, and their whole body's pulsing with life force. And they're getting turned on by the whole thing. Somebody in the corner can go, wow, I might be able to try that too. Or a group of people. I mean, I work a lot with groups, as you know, and Movement Mass is just like a teeny fractal of it. But, bring together all the men of color and let them frickin' dance together, and let us bear witness to the outrage and to the power and the potency of what is shared and not given room to express in life-giving ways. And let's take care of the vulnerable people who might be overwhelmed or scared by that. That's real too. But wow, nothing like that can happen in solitude. It can happen in the collective we. Or, what are our affinity groups, and how can we come together and teach each other? So both our differences and our likeness can be catalysts on the dance floor. And then, just the shared breath. My goodness, when many of us are breathing together, the lung of the collective gets expanded, and more air can permeate the cells and the tissues of the individuals present. And we need that. That's like it's the medicine for COVID in a certain way. I don't in any way say it's like a remedy for COVID. But those of us who are blessed to be alive and not moving COVID through our bodies, how can we exercise these lungs and expand them and contract them? And, the waterways and the earth, the whole planet is struggling with the basic infrastructure and the elements. So how can we bring prayer and movement to our basic elements as humans together on that dance floor in ceremony? The fire, the water, the earth, the air, the spirit. So, we're catalysts for each other. We can create ceremony. We can bring in this powerful ancestral energy. We can focus on whatever it is we need to focus on together. And there's a force there that's just so potent. And we can bear witness to each other. And then maybe, also let's not forget, we can have so much fun together. Like the play of being on the dance floor can be so delicious. And we are missing that. Of course we're missing that. But we're being grown in another way right now. And I've always said that the dance is one of the antidotes to this screen problem that so many of our young people were having, where there's like this addiction to their computers, myself at times included, for reasons we all understand. And now we have all this screen time, but the dance actually is potent medicine because it works at all dimensions, and the head and the heart, the will, the cells, the sensations, and of course the spirit. So I feel like the last thing I want to say, and maybe the most important about the community, well, there's two, well, they're related, is something called, we have these soul dates. And we can get together in life and go out for tea, but when we get on the dance floor, it's really hard to forget our soul dates. And something awakens because we're moving from soul eventually. And it's like, whoa, we came together to do something. What is that call to action? Maybe it's to fall in love and have a family, or maybe it's to fall in love and create an initiative that helps bring who knows what to the world. So I feel like that's ultimately, we're able to keep our karmic dates a little more easily when we're dancing together, when we're breathing together, when we're sweating together, when we're praying together, when we're falling apart and coming back into more wholeness together. Good. It's natural. It's the way we're meant to be, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel to share after, or when I got back from the States, I then started dancing 5 rhythms here in Melbourne as well. And met my love for the last 5 years. In silence, no words, of course. But it was a beautiful first soul date without us knowing.
Oh, I love that story. And look at you, you're still so full of the deliciousness of that. Yeah. That's beautiful. I always say you should take that person, somebody says, I'm in love with so-and-so. I'm like, great, take them onto the dance floor. Let's see how that goes. One, that really is such a litmus test for who somebody is and where they're at. And by all means, many people have fallen in love with folks who aren't dancers, and then they find their way into the dance together. But there is something very interesting and fabulous about dancing with the beloved inside out, in the mirror, in another person.
Yeah. And there's so many people, I mean, dancing and say at festivals, still dancing, where there's a number of people whom I know and we know each other very intimately, but we choose not to exchange names or words. It's just a glance across the dance floor. And we choose to really honor the sacredness of that connection we have without wrapping words around it, without getting to know each other in the ways that we might typically through words and through labels. And it's just a real like soft closing of the eyes towards each other and a slow nod and maybe a hug. But there's something so beautiful about those soul bonds that exist and emerge on the dance floor.
Yeah, it gives us hope, doesn't it? Actually, to know that there's just so much fire and so much love and so much possibility of different ways of connecting. And when I run my summer camps, everybody gets mad at me because I don't want to hear anybody's name at first. I personally don't even. I'm not that interested. I'm much more interested in who showed up on my dance floor. And the name doesn't tell me. It can, and it does breed a certain kind of safety for some, but I just like, let's just get here. And that's what you're saying. Yeah. That's what you're saying. Oh, I can't wait to get back on the dance floor because it'll be fun.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there was a couple of I suppose questions come up for me around the notion of embodied leadership. So I suppose I'm curious to hear your vision or hope or dream for the world. And I mean, regarding all of us as leaders, as stewards of culture, of country, what does embodied leadership really feel and look like for you?
Yeah, well, it's a lot of things and so simple. It's where the head, the heart, and the will are hooked up, and that we're not talking heads, we're not disconnected from our broken, open hearts, and we're able to have our ideals manifest in ordinary physical earth plane reality. And we're not so entrenched in earth plane reality that we can't see a bigger story. We don't buy the story that's being fed to us in our day-to-day lives or by the news or by our minds. We actually are inspired. So there's this congruency between head, heart, and will. And then there's this sense of being, like you said, a steward to the future now, and something is governing us that is the true law, the spirit of the universe, guarding and guiding us, and we are in service to that, in how we make decisions and the kinds of decisions that we make. And with that, we are free in our thinking, imaginative. And of course, Gabrielle used to talk about, Gabrielle Roth, the intuition, the imagination, and the inspiration. So we're also, we lay out a strategic plan, but we're also willing to listen to what is emerging and what needs to happen now and now and now. And that's big, thick, heavy systems have a hard time with that. They're too cumbersome. And sometimes my people I work with have a hard time with that with me too, because I just prefer to operate like that. However, it's that yin and yang. It's that, how do we give things form and structure and also allow things to unfold? And that is a dance that takes some maturing to figure out how to do that uniquely through each of us. And then I think the last thing you've pointed to and spoken to and you live, which is an embodied leader is so connected to the root system of the world and to their heart that it's not about me, it's about we. And we can be my family. I can be a leader of my family. We can be all species. And really it needs to be honest, thinking about local and global at the same moment. And that's a cliche. I'm actually going to change my language on that. Not even thinking about being so attuned to all of life through our own body that we can feel the suffering and carry that with us in how we show up. So we don't separate from the brokenness as we deepen our work of repair and restoring connection to the original pattern, which is whole.
That's a world that we are weaving, but a world that, is so inspiring and enlivening and feels just so natural and right. I was going to, when you were speaking about community and co-regulation, and for me, the sense that, our human experience in this body with this mind that has been crafted, whether unbeknownst to ourselves or slowly through reconditioning, as you mentioned, there is no way for us to understand another's experience. There is an inherent infidelity between our experiences, yet our souls and spirits, and there's a part of us that is sharing in kind of a collective pool of human possibility, or of possibility, full stop. And so there is a part of us that can choose to tune in to that. And I love feeling and just envisioning the dance as a way to witness others and to therefore witness parts of ourselves in a new way. And when you were speaking of that before, the idea of embodied leadership really came up for me, and stewardship, and the ability to really go to those places within us, to feel the grief in our own way, and to let that humble us into a kind of real stewardship, a real earthed and rooted stewardship. And so I love the idea of the dance and that kind of co-regulatory space of communities of practice being a place for this embodied leadership that we're touching on to really start to be developed or embodied and lived, to build those capacities in our own nervous systems and hearts, to extend ourselves a little, to encompass a little more of that pool of possibility.
Well, I want to just say that creating a container that is conscious, that is truly able to consider the people who don't necessarily have leaders representing them, to create a dance floor that has true safety so that there's a way for people to give feedback when there's been an aggression, a microaggression or macroaggression, to create safer dance floors that really keep inviting more voices to speak and come forward, and music to be chosen that really honors the musicians and what their message is, and the instruments and where they come from is an art in and of itself. And to me, that's one of the ways that good work you're speaking about really can happen. And in fact, it's the only way it can happen. And I feel that we're in a revolution in the conscious dance space at this point about how do we create more inclusive and just spaces so that we can welcome our global community together. And we're in a shake, rattle, and roll around that. And so I just want to invite all of us who are on the dance floors, how can we become more responsible with creating that kind of safety so that everybody can keep healing and everybody can truly be represented and uplifted and empowered to show up.
Yeah. So. Yeah, that's been a big theme for me, mainly in kind of the men's work movement as a queer man, just really sensing a possibility for a greater sense of inclusion in the healing masculinity movement. I feel like we're going part of the way, and I really sense there is a lot of work to be done in very subtle ways, like languaging and the terminology we use, and how important those little cues are for someone who is maybe in a minority group and isn't often represented. Constantly, the nervous system is listening for little cues to say it's okay here, you're allowed, you're welcome, you're celebrated. And when those little language cues aren't offered, it means so much.
Right on. And I'm so excited that you're going to keep cultivating that space. And thank you for hanging in for probably the moments where there were misses for you. And we can talk more about that. We now do 3 gender events. When we do just 3 gender events, a men's event, a third gender space, and those who identify with the feminine space whenever we do gender work. And, it's just, there's so much to say in that realm. And I'd be happy to connect with some others who are really deeply in that conversation.
Yeah, I'd love that. I really wanted to dive deeper into that as a fragment of what it means to be an embodied leader. For me, it's connecting to the queerness within all of us. And from that place, how can we, from that felt sense of our own queerness, create spaces for wholeness? And so I'd love to connect with others in that space. It's just a really alive thread for me at the moment.
I'm so excited about that. And having gone answer, and I really had a big gender identity shift that I choose not to label but I know something about the ever emerging queerness of our being and our fluidity. And I really love what you're carrying into the world, and can't get back into who knows what kind of dance. But I really bless you and thank you. And I see your courage and your integrity and your brilliance. And It's just been a joy to have a conversation with you. And thank you for inviting me in. And I wonder if there's any last little thing that's on your to-do list of talking with me, or are we coming to
I suppose I'm curious. During this time, we spoke a little bit about dancing alone, but more so specific to this time. And also, I mean, I'm genuinely curious, as someone who, for me, going to, say, a techno gig by myself is such a big part of my spiritual and mental health regime, like dancing it through, dancing with it. And so I'm curious, maybe just as some more practical things for people to take away, whether they're new to the dance, whether they are stuck at home and really wanting to move something, just some of the maybe cues that you would invite people to bring into their dance so that dance becomes ceremony, dance becomes a ritual. Are there any cues that you often invite or offer people?
Yes, of course. Well, the first is let your senses be your friend. You know, even when you're sitting on Zoom, spend time touching your body and smelling what's happening. Put oils on your body if you have access to them. You know, every time we put food or tea or whatever it is in our mouths, let ourselves taste it. And the sound. And there's so much noise out there. So how can we bring to ourselves beauty to just really help ourselves get in these bodies? And then while we're making contact from the outside in, to start noticing, what's it like when I touch my chest? Can I feel the pulse from the inside? Can I feel my heartbeat on the inside? Can I all of a sudden notice my saliva starting to come on strong? Can I feel the tingling in my feet and the twitch in my eye and the pinch in my hip and the burn in my back? And all of a sudden it's like a big fascinating show happening inside this body. And so by doing that and making that part of our practice, when we get on the dance, when the energy starts to speed up, whether it's a life crisis or, the music gets going faster, we're staying home. And the irony is, the more we can stay connected at that micro level to the subtlety of our internal landscape, the more we can actually lose ourselves and get out of the way. We are basically giving our mind something to do instead of perseverating over some ridiculous story that isn't even true, or trying to figure out the future that isn't now, or we're actually engaging ourselves in a way that brings us into the presence and allows ourselves to let go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into whatever is. And then we can start to, okay, I'm loving that music, and I'm going with that, and I'm feeling it, and I'm just, okay, that's a lot of pleasure. I can't do any more of that. I'm going to do something else, and then we just get to watch ourselves like this, fabulous, entertaining phenomenon. And I just, it's like we are interesting, and to study ourselves and to snap your body, draw it, listen to it, speak, let that hand speak, that hip speak, that knee speak, that toe speak. Let these parts of our bodies, our inner ear, talk to our jaw. Let these conversations happen and make that your business. And before you know it, you're not home. You're so deeply in that you can go out without ever losing ground. And we can go into these states in the dance where we are taken, and we also get lost and we get found. And this gets back to how we started out, the riddle. It's all a riddle. To get in, you got to go out. To go out, you got to get in. But we're so disassociated, and especially after these fires and these hurricanes and these pandemics and these computers. So we really have to get religious. And I'm not, Gabrielle used to say, don't make a religion out of this stuff. I'm not making a religion out of it either, but I am a devotee, and you'll understand that. A deep devotee of what is so. And this is what's so. And in those moments of pure grace, when I get the heck out of the way and something bigger is dancing me, hallelujah. And they happen, and I remember, and, it's a blessing. It's not an everyday thing. And our attachment to it will keep us from ever getting there again. So we just have to keep back to getting more and more connected Oh, it's not sensations now. It's big, strong emotions. Let them go. What are they? Follow them. And that still has a somatic sensation. It still has
Mm,
sensation. We just oscillate between our feelings and our
mm,
sensations. And we dance.
mm.
We make a dance of
Yeah.
it all.
Life is a dance. Great. Brilliant. Well, I hope that, I mean, for me, it was this whole conversation has just been a reminder to dance more at the moment, living with bulging discs. And so I've been really careful with my movement, but have slowly started to ease back into it, just sensing, you know, if some of the pain is now more so psychosomatic than anything else. And so starting to ease back into movement and remind the body of what it actually feels like to move, and that discomfort is okay and not all discomfort is actually pain, essentially.
Right. But you also may be in a real physically compromised situation. So
Yeah.
please make sure you get the medical
Yeah.
care. No, 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 no. I've had like really big injuries in
Mm,
my body that have taken, it's like it's not about just being with the pain, although that's
mm.
really good. But I've needed
Yeah.
help, like SOS. So please don't, I mean, you've got a lot of dancing ahead of you, may it be so. So figure out what you need to do to make sure your body stays
Yeah.
resets and you core sorted out
Yeah.
there, okay?
Yes, Melissa.
Promise me.
All right. Well, I definitely was reminded and enlivened and emboldened in many ways again. So thank you for your beautiful energy and space and devotion to this work of stewarding and midwifing the new and the emerging. And I'm curious if there's anything else you feel to share to those listening, just feel rounded and whole. And
Well, thank you for listening. I'm touched for those of you who made it through. And I would say put your feet on the ground and wiggle your toes like all the time. Walk on the earth. When you're sitting in those chairs all day on computers, keep feeling your sits bones and your butt and let your hands just pet your beautiful bodies. And don't believe any messaging that doesn't help you feel like you are beautiful. You are exactly as you need to be, and we are evolving. So let's dedicate ourselves to being the ever more awakened and connected and conscious beings that we're meant to be. We'll see you on the big dance floor of life. How about that?
great. Thank you again, Melissa.
Thank you, Al.
What questions are still whirring inside for you? What landed and rung loudly for you? Let's take a moment. Thank you for joining me for another life-affirming and enriching conversation, each one a light, a torch to guide us on our path to being in right relationship with ourselves, those we walk with, and the ecologies we are very much a part of. I trust this has gifted you something to place in your toolkit to support you in your journey and your leadership. Make sure to connect with me and leave any comments on my Facebook or Instagram page at @ljeffrey, and check out the links in the show notes. This show is completely funded by listeners just like you, so if you feel generous and wish to be part of nourishing these inquiries that we're exploring together, you can leave a once-off donation or soon subscribe to my Patreon membership. Show notes, resources, and donations are all at www.spacesbetweenpodcast.com. Until next time, remember, we can't rush our way back. Notice connections and tend to the sweet, sweet spaces between. Lots of love.